Now then, about that proposed constitutional amendment. I agree. It is time for the Electoral College to go, for any number of reasons. 2016 being the most recent one, but also 2000, and a few other elections before that as well. But before we get into a discussion of why the Electoral College should be abolished and what would replace it, I want to discuss briefly why it is that we have an Electoral College to begin with, because it just might turn out to be relevant in the future. And if we abolish the Electoral College in a rush, in haste, in anger, we may find ourselves, especially after the current political Sturm und Drang, wishing that maybe we hadn't done that. So, let me begin with a short history lecture. In 1789, the United States, all 13 of them, did not have anything approaching mass communications. There were people who had no idea when the elections were going to be held and what they were going to be held for. Their political perspective seldom extended as far as the state borders, and hardly ever beyond that. The Founding Fathers expected that there would be more than one candidate for president. There might be 3 or 4 or 13. And if you have 3 or 4 or 6 or 13 candidates for president, how do you determine which one's going to be the winner? How are you going to determine which one best reflects the sentiments of the voting public at all? If there are, let's say, 8 candidates for president, none of them is going to get a majority. And whoever is determined to be the winner, by whatever means, is going to have to make deals with one faction or another, or another, or another, in order to get anything done. This was pretty much the rule in British politics at the time. And British politics was hardly the model of democracy. So, in order to avoid that, and to avoid falling into the patterns of that bad example, in order to be sure that whoever was determined to be the duly elected President of the United States would have the political credibility to act in the best interests of the nation as a whole, the Founding Fathers decided that a vicariate, if you will, would be the ones who actually elected the President of the United States. Yes, it could be argued, as it has been argued, that the Electoral College is, well, not fundamentally undemocratic, but it is not as close or immediately democratic as what we have today. The purpose of the Electoral College, pure and simple, was to discuss and debate amongst themselves which of the candidates would be the best choice to be President of the United States, a unified United States, a unified government of the United States, the Congress and the executive working together, keeping each other in check from political excess, and supporting each other as the Constitution required in order to be a successful government. Now, not too long after that, in the election of Thomas Jefferson, the Electoral College actually came into play because Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, who were the best of friends, they didn't always see eye to eye, but they were good friends nonetheless. They respected each other's opinions. They ended up in a virtual dead heat. And it fell to the Congress, which was at that time mostly the Electoral College, to decide between them which of the two candidates would be the better choice. they opted for Jefferson. And the rest is history. And if you think I'm making this up, check it out. You can Google it, or you can read any good book, history book, about the early days of our republic. It's in there, in a lot more detail than I just recounted for you. And now let me give you one more example. From Arizona. About 20 years ago, we had a governor. He was Republican. He was obnoxious. He was offensive. And he won on the strength of the fact that Maricopa County alone has more than 50% of the population of the state of Arizona. So any successful candidate for governor or United States senator has to carry Maricopa County. And the rest of the state is, well, functionally irrelevant. And it's been that way for a very long time. Nonetheless, the governor, Evan Mecham, who was a notorious, if not by his own admission, somewhat benevolent racist, won, technically. But he didn't get a majority of the votes. He got a plurality because there was another candidate in that race. To be honest with you, I don't remember the name of either of the other two candidates. One of them was a Democrat and the other one was not. Nonetheless, because Evan Mecham got more votes than the other two candidates under Arizona's Constitution, he was the duly elected governor of Arizona. Had something like the Electoral College been in place in Arizona, Evan Mecham would have lost. But that's neither here nor there. He was eventually forced out of office because of, well, frankly, because of his racism, and because of his corruption, and because of other things. But if the state of Arizona had had something like the Electoral College, Evan Mecham would not have been elected governor. Now, I mention this because let's just suppose that in 2020, there is the Republican candidate, whoever that bastard is going to be. There is a Democratic candidate, whoever that celebrity might be. And let's just suppose there is a third party candidate who does well. And because it's a three-way race, none of them gets a majority. Let's just suppose that the vote, the popular vote, is divvied up more or less equally three ways. What do you do then? Well, in that case, the Electoral College would be essential to determining who the best choice would be for the next president of the United States. But the problem with that is, and this is where one of the reasons why I think the Electoral College needs to be abolished. About 100 years ago, the state primary system caught on, and it was instituted in more and more states. It was part of the progressive reforms of the Progressive Party. Oh yes, there has been a Progressive Party in the United States in one form or another since Teddy Roosevelt, who was arguably the first progressive, even though he was nominally a Republican. I could give a history lecture on that, but that's not the purpose of this video. But anyway, because each of the states was allowed to make their own rules, their own laws, their own guidelines regarding how a primary system would be established, because the state legislatures themselves had no particular wisdom or enlightenment on how best to do this, they sort of kind of abdicated that responsibility to the state parties, which 100 years ago consisted primarily of the Republican Party and, well, the Democratic Party. The two biggest players in the game got to make the rules of the game. One of the things they did was decide that the electors who would vote together in the Electoral College with their counterparts from other states would be picked by the parties. And that's why, even to this day, when you vote for President of the United States and Vice President, you don't actually vote for the Republican candidate. You don't actually vote for the Democratic candidate. You vote for the people whom the Republican Party has picked. You vote for the people whom the Republican Party has picked. You vote for the people whom the Green Party, or the Libertarian Party, or the Socialist Workers' Party, or the American Communist Party, or the American Nationalist Socialist Party, or whichever party, the Donald Duck Party. You vote for the people whom the party has already selected without consultation with the public, will be the people who vote in the Electoral College for the candidate that they are pledged to support. That's why this past Electoral College was such a farce and such a hopeless fantasy by those who thought, well, if we could just persuade a few electors to change their mind. No, that's not going to happen. You might as well ask Ivanka Trump to change her last name and repudiate her father. Not going to happen. It's not going to happen for a Republican. It's not going to happen for a Democrat. It's not going to happen for an independent. It's just not going to happen because that's not the way the electors are chosen today. That, I think, is the main reason, the most compelling reason why the Electoral College needs to be abolished, because the electors are not the independent-minded people that the Founding Fathers meant for them to be. They are no less political hacks than the people who work in the party organization, Republican, Democrat, Green, Libertarian, or whomever. The purpose of the purpose of the Electoral College is to reinforce the choice of the voters. And the rules are set up in such a way that whichever candidate gets 50% plus one vote gets all of the electoral votes. That's the way it is. And unless we change the laws or amend the Constitution, that's the way it's going to be. Now, my thought on this is we should abolish the Electoral College altogether, because there are quicker, easier, and less expensive ways of resolving electoral ties and other dilemmas. The easiest solution, the best solution, I think, is a runoff election. Other democracies around the world have runoff elections. Mexico, France, Germany, Britain, all the best democracies in the world have opted for a runoff system in the event that neither candidate gets a majority, or none of the candidates gets a majority, or even a plurality, really. They have a runoff election. It's the way democracy works in the world today. It's time for that system to come to the United States. We invented modern political democracy. And yet, because of Republican and Democratic intransigence and unwillingness to catch up with the times, keep up with the times, we still have an archaic, outmoded process of electing our president. And that's why we have Donald Trump. And it's why we have George W. Bush as presidents of the United States. We have to abolish the Electoral College and replace it with not just a popular vote, but a runoff system, or a system of runoff elections in the event that, well, it becomes necessary. Now, the details of how that would work are not really something that I want to bore you to death with. I mean, I know how it would work, but I think for right now I've kind of made my case for abolishing the Electoral College with a constitutional amendment. Now, the trick is getting it past the Congress, because the Constitution of the United States allows two processes, either one, for amending the Constitution. The most common one, the usual practice, is for a proposed amendment to pass both the House and the Senate and then be referred to the separate states for ratification. That usually works, but not always. Anybody remember Prohibition? Yeah. The Congress didn't want to touch that with a 100-gallon keg, and they didn't. So, it was up to the separate states. The separate states proposed repealing prohibition, and once one state passed on it, then that proposition was passed around to all the states until finally enough states voted in favor of that amendment took effect and became law. That's one way of doing it. The other example is, well, not so successful. Anybody here besides me remember the abortive Equal Rights Amendment? It did pass through both houses of Congress, and it got all the states it needed except for one. Guess which one? Kansas. And there has been nothing said or done or proposed about the Equal Rights Amendment since. That was, I believe, almost 40 years ago. And so here we are, 40 years later. No Equal Rights Amendment. We have the hashtag #MeToo movement. We have the hashtag Time's Up movement, which is a good thing. I support those movements because, unfortunately, since the Equal Rights Amendment failed, that is the next best option. But with regard to amending the U.S. Constitution, with the current House and Senate being composed the way they are, a Republican majority, which doesn't even like the idea of a United States Constitution, and Democrats who will disgrace themselves shamelessly or shamefully just so they don't get bullied too much by the Republicans, getting a proposed constitutional amendment through the United States Congress is probably not going to happen, which means it's up to us. We the people. We the people can do this. Read the Constitution. See how it's done. Read the history of prohibition. See how that was repealed. It's there. There is precedent. We can do this. And we don't need Congress to do it for us because, frankly, the Congress is no damn good at this point, Republican or Democrat. Well, I think that's all I have to say for right now. I will be posting more on my Facebook page. And until then, be seeing you.